Ma'am, this is against policy.
Policy? I own this airline.
You what?
Here's the deed.
Oh my God.
The quiet hum of the jet engines was a gentle promise of altitude and escape. But inside the first-class cabin of Apex Air Flight 762, the air was turning sharp and cold. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was the chilling contempt radiating from a flight attendant named Brittany. Her smile, a perfect crimson slash, was reserved for everyone but the woman in seat 2B. For her, there was only a flicker of disdain, a deliberate slowness, and then a gesture so small, yet so profound, it cracked the veneer of professional courtesy, a full dismissive roll of her eyes. She thought no one important saw. She thought the woman dressed in a simple grey tracksuit was nobody. In that moment, Brittany sealed her own fate, never imagining that the nobody in 2B held the very sky in her hands. Dr. Serafina Dubois adjusted the cashmere hood of her simple grey tracksuit, a garment that had cost more than the monthly rent on a decent city apartment, but was designed to scream comfort, not wealth. For her luxury wasn't about logos. It was about the frictionless ease of existence, something she had meticulously engineered for herself over 2 decades of relentless work. Today, however, friction was precisely what she was encountering, and its source was the flight attendant with the impossibly perfect blonde chignon and a name tag that read Brittany. Serafina was flying from New York to Austin, not on one of her own jets, the sleek silver fleet of Ether Aviation, but commercially in first class. It was a sentimental journey. She was on her way to see Dr. Alistair Finch, her former university professor, and the man who had first believed in her radical ideas about neural network optimization. He was unwell, and the thought of him had softened her, made her want to feel the anonymous thrum of a shared journey, a temporary return to the world before she reshaped a corner of it. The trouble began subtly. While other passengers were greeted with warm smiles and offers of pre-departure champagne, Serafina received a clipped, "Can I take your jacket?" with a gaze that lingered disapprovingly on her well-worn, comfortable sneakers. "No, thank you. I'm fine," Serafina replied, her voice a low, calm melody that seemed to annoy Brittany further. Serafina watched as Brittany fussed over the man in 2A, a gentleman in a crisp Brioni suit named Robert Chen, laughing at a joke he hadn't made and ensuring his glass was filled to the precise, sparkling brim. When Serafina pressed her call button a few minutes later to request a simple bottle of water, Brittany took a full 5 minutes to respond, her approach slow and reluctant. "Yes." The word was sharp. "May I have a bottle of still water, please room temperature if possible?" Brittany's painted-on smile tightened. "We're still boarding. I'll get it when we're in the air." She turned before Serafina could reply, leaving the request hanging in the air like a dismissed thought. 5 minutes later, she served a glass of iced water to a woman across the aisle who had just sat down. Serafina didn't press the button again. She simply observed. She had built her empire, a multi-billion-dollar tech firm, born from a single brilliant algorithm by observing patterns. She saw patterns in code, in market trends, and most clearly in human behavior. And the pattern emanating from Brittany was one of blatant layered prejudice. It was the clothes. It was the casual, unadorned way Serafina carried herself. And Serafina knew, with a weary certainty, that had shadowed her entire life. It was the color of her skin. To Brittany, a black woman in a tracksuit, even in a $10,000 first-class seat, was an anomaly, a glitch in the system that didn't compute. The man in 2A, Robert, leaned over slightly after Brittany had flounced away. "That was unnecessarily rude," he murmured, his eyes kind. "I can get her attention for you." Serafina offered him a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, Robert, but it's quite all right. I'm in no hurry." The flight took off, and the service began. Brittany moved through the cabin with a practiced, almost theatrical grace. She knew the names of the frequent flyers, remembered that Mr. Henderson in 3D liked his whiskey with a single large ice cube, and that Mrs. Albright in 1A preferred her coffee black and immediately after her meal. This performance of personalized service was Serafina noted part of the Apex Air brand. When Brittany reached row 2, she turned to Robert first. "Mr. Chen, another glass of the Sauvignon Blanc for you. And can I get you started with our marinated olives and warm nuts?" "That would be lovely, thank you, Brittany," he said, then gestured pointedly towards Serafina. "And your other passenger here has been waiting for some water." Brittany's eyes flickered to Serafina, and it was then that it happened. It wasn't a dramatic, overt gesture. It was a micro-expression, a swift, upward arc of her eyes, coupled with the slightest exhalation through her nose. It was a perfect, crystalline moment of contempt. This woman, the gesture said with her demands, and her cheap clothes, is an inconvenience. Serafina felt a familiar, cold stillness settle over her. It was not anger. It was something far more potent precision. For years, she had battled dismissive venture capitalists, condescending corporate rivals, and the systemic bias that questioned her very presence in the rooms where she now held all the power. This flight attendant, in her small sphere of influence, was just a microcosm of a world she had fought and conquered. "I'll have that water now," Serafina said, her voice dropping no more than a decibel, but gaining an immeasurable weight. "And I'd also like to see the purser's name on the flight manifest." Brittany froze for a half-second, the eye roll caught in the aftermath. The request was unusual. A passenger asking for a purser by name was either a seasoned corporate traveler with connections or a potential problem. She glanced at Serafina's plain attire again, and her brain defaulted to the latter. This woman was going to complain. Fine. Let her. "Our purser is Mr. Albright. He's busy at the moment." Brittany snipped her professionalism, fraying into undisguised hostility. "I'll get your water." She returned moments later, placing the plastic bottle of water on Serafina's tray table with a little more force than necessary. The click echoed in the quiet cabin. Serafina simply nodded, her gaze unreadable. She didn't touch the water. She sat back, closed her eyes, and for the remainder of the flight became a model of quiet, unassuming grace. To Brittany, this was a victory. The difficult passenger had been put in her place. To Serafina, it was merely the calm before a storm she had no intention of starting, but every intention of finishing. The scent of pan-seared salmon and wild rice began to drift through the cabin. Brittany was in her element, now presenting meal choices with the flourish of a maître d' at a Michelin-starred restaurant. She carried the heavy ceramic plates with an effortless strength, her movements efficient and imbued with a sense of purpose. Her domain was this pressurized tube of luxury, and she was its gatekeeper. When she arrived at row 2, she once again addressed Robert first, presenting his meal with a deferential bow of her head. "Your salmon, Mr. Chen. I made sure the chef gave you an extra lemon wedge, just how you like it." "You have a startlingly good memory, Brittany," Robert replied, impressed despite himself. Brittany's smile was radiant. Then she turned to Serafina. The smile vanished, replaced by a mask of bored obligation. "Did you want the salmon or the beef?" she asked, not bothering to describe the dishes as she had for everyone else. "I'll have the vegetarian pasta, please," Serafina said calmly. Brittany's brow furrowed. "I don't think we have any of those left. It was a special request item." This was a lie. She knew for a fact there were 2 preloaded, as there always were, for the New York-Austin leg, a popular route for tech executives, many of whom had specific dietary needs. She just didn't want to make the trip back to the galley. "I pre-ordered it with my ticket," Serafina stated, her tone still even. There was no accusation, just a simple statement of fact. "If you wouldn't mind checking, I'd appreciate it." The politeness seemed to infuriate Brittany more than an outburst would have. It was the woman's unshakable composure, her refusal to be flustered. It felt superior. Brittany's jaw tightened. "Fine," she muttered, and pivoted with a huff. She returned not with the pasta, but with a standard salmon dish. "We're out of the pasta," she said, her voice flat as she placed the plate on Serafina's tray. The catering company must have made a mistake. Robert Chen, who was midway through a bite of his own salmon, paused and looked from the plate to Brittany. He knew a lie when he heard one. The excuse was flimsy, delivered with the petulance of a child caught doing something they shouldn't. Serafina looked down at the fish, then back up at Brittany. She didn't protest. She didn't argue. She simply gave a slight nod. "Thank you." She picked up her fork and knife, cut a small piece of salmon, and placed it on the side of her plate. She ate the accompanying vegetables and rice, leaving the fish untouched. The gesture was quiet, dignified, and a more powerful indictment than any shouted complaint. It communicated that she was not going to be starved, but she would not accept the lie either. Brittany saw it and felt a hot flash of anger. The woman was making a point. She was trying to humiliate her, all this over a stupid plate of pasta. In Brittany's mind, Serafina was no longer just an annoying passenger. She was an antagonist, deliberately trying to make her shift more difficult. The cabin lights dimmed for the in-flight movie. Serafina requested a blanket. Brittany, claiming they were all in use, failed to provide one. Robert, overhearing this, found one himself in an empty overhead bin from the row behind and passed it to Serafina with an apologetic look. "My apologies on behalf of the airline," he said softly. "This is not their usual standard. It's people who set the standard, not logos." Serafina replied, her voice barely a whisper. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, her expression serene. For the next hour, Brittany made a show of ignoring Seat 2B completely. She refilled drinks, offered snacks, and chatted amiably with every single other passenger in the cabin, her laughter tinkling just loudly enough to be noticeable. Her exclusion of Serafina was a deliberate, calculated act of social isolation, a high school tactic deployed at 35,000 feet. Serafina, meanwhile, had opened her laptop. It was a sleek, custom-built machine with no discernible brand. The screen was filled not with a movie, but with lines of complex code and schematics for what looked like a next-generation propulsion system. She worked with quiet, intense focus, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Brittany caught a glimpse of the screen as she passed by. Code, schematics. It meant nothing to her except that it confirmed her bias. This woman was probably some low-level coder who'd saved up all year for this on flight and was now putting on airs. The thought filled her with a renewed sense of superiority. Brittany was the one who belonged here, who flew this route 3 times a week. Serafina was just a tourist in her world. As the plane began its initial descent into Austin, Brittany started her final pass through the cabin to collect trays and trash. She did so with a renewed, almost cheerful energy. The flight was almost over. The problem passenger would soon be gone. She reached Serafina and saw the untouched piece of salmon now cold on the ceramic plate. "Finished with that?" she asked, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "Yes, thank you," Serafina said, closing her laptop. As Brittany reached for the tray, Serafina spoke again, her voice clear and calm, yet carrying an authority that made the flight attendant pause. "Brittany." It was the first time she had used her name. I will require you to remain on the aircraft after the other passengers have deplaned. Please also inform the captain and the purser, Mr. Albright, that I need to speak with them on the jet bridge. It is a matter of utmost urgency regarding the future of Apex Air's premium service." Brittany stared, baffled. The audacity was breathtaking. Who did this woman think she was, an FAA inspector, a secret shopper? The ideas were laughable. All crew have procedures to follow upon landing. Brittany scoffed her patience, finally snapping. "We're not available for customer debriefs on the jet bridge." Serafina didn't even blink. She held Brittany's gaze, and for the first time, Brittany saw past the calm exterior. She saw a flicker of something vast and unyielding, a power so profound it was almost terrifying. "I assure you," Serafina said, her voice like polished steel. "They will want to be available for this one. Tell them the meeting is regarding Project Ether." The code name hung in the air. It meant nothing to Brittany, but the certainty with which it was spoken sent a tiny, cold shiver of doubt down her spine. For the first time all flight she felt a sliver of uncertainty, but she quickly crushed it, her pride and prejudice rushing back in to protect her. "Whatever," she sneered, snatching the tray. "I'll pass on your little message." She stalked back to the galley, convinced she was dealing with a delusional, self-important passenger. She had no idea she had just walked away from the woman who had signed her paychecks for the last 8 hours. The moment the plane docked at the gate and the seatbelt sign pinged off, a wave of relief washed over Brittany. The ordeal was over. Passengers began to stand, retrieving their carry-ons from the overhead bins. Brittany positioned herself near the doorway, her customer service smile firmly back in place, ready to bid farewell to the clientele who mattered. "Thank you for flying, Apex, Mr. Chen," she said warmly to Robert as he passed. He paused, his expression serious. "You should know, Brittany," he said in a low voice. "Your behavior toward your other passenger in my row was unprofessional and frankly unacceptable. I will be filing a formal note with the airline." Brittany's smile faltered. A complaint from a Platinum Medallion member like Robert Chen was serious. It would mean a meeting with her supervisor, a mark on her record. A surge of resentment burned in her chest. It was all that woman's fault. She'd somehow charmed Mr. Chen into taking her side. She watched as Serafina remained seated patiently, waiting for the cabin to clear her laptop bag resting on her lap. The woman's composure was infuriating. Once the last passenger had shuffled off the plane, a palpable quiet descended. Only Serafina Brittany, the other first-class attendant, the purser Michael Albright, and the 2 pilots remained. Michael, a kind, middle-aged man with tired eyes, approached Brittany. "So what's this about? This passenger in 2B wanted a meeting?" he asked, an edge of annoyance in his voice. They were all eager to get to their crew hotel. "Honestly, Michael, I have no idea," Brittany said, rolling her eyes for what she thought was the final time. "She's been difficult the whole flight, complaining about the food, acting entitled. Now she's demanding a meeting about Project Ether, whatever that is. Probably just wants to feel important." Before Michael could respond, Serafina stood up and walked calmly toward them at the front of the aircraft. She was no longer just a woman in a tracksuit. Her posture had shifted. There was an aura of command about her that hadn't been present before, or perhaps had simply been kept under wraps. She addressed the captain, first a man with silver hair named David Morrison. "Captain Morrison, thank you for a smooth flight." "You're welcome, ma'am," he said, his tone polite but weary. "My flight attendant said you had an urgent matter to discuss." "I do," Serafina replied. She turned her gaze to Michael Albright. "Mr. Albright, your flight attendant, Ms. Jenkins, informed me you were the purser on this flight." "That's correct," Michael said. "And Brittany Jenkins." Serafina continued, her eyes finally locking onto the flight attendant who had scorned her for hours. Brittany felt a jolt, as if she were under a microscope. "My name is Dr. Serafina Dubois." The name didn't register with Brittany, but she saw Captain Morrison's eyes widen slightly. Michael Albright's face went pale. They were both senior enough to have been briefed on the major corporate shifts happening at Apex Air. They knew the name. Serafina reached into her laptop bag and pulled out not a wallet or a phone, but a slim, elegant portfolio bound in dark blue leather. She didn't open it. She simply held it. As of 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time this morning, Serafina announced, her voice resonating with quiet, absolute authority in the silent cabin. Project Ether ceased to be a project. It became a reality. My company, Ether Aviation, has officially completed its merger with Apex Air. I am the new majority shareholder on the board of directors, and I have been appointed to lead the new Apex Private Division, overseeing all premium and charter services for the entire airline. The silence that followed was deafening. The hum of the auxiliary power unit outside seemed to fade into nothingness. Brittany's mind struggled to process the words. Majority shareholder, Ether Aviation. It sounded like nonsense, like something out of a movie. She stared at the woman in the grey tracksuit, the worn sneakers, the unassuming face. It was impossible. This was a joke, a prank. But the looks on the faces of the captain and the purser told her it was not. Their professional composure had shattered, replaced by a stark, dawning horror. Captain Morrison was the first to speak, his voice strained. "Dr. Dubois, forgive us. We had no idea you would be on this flight. Your name wasn't on the special manifest." "I know," Serafina said. "I booked it under a different name. I wanted to experience the flagship New York to Austin first-class service as a regular passenger, to see the best of the best that Apex has to offer its most valued customers, an unfiltered, authentic experience." Her gaze drifted pointedly to Brittany, and the weight of that statement crashed down on the flight attendant. Every act of contempt, every dismissive gesture, every sneer and eye roll from the past 5 hours replayed in Brittany's mind, now cast in a terrifying new light. The water, the pasta, the blanket, the deliberate ignorance. She hadn't been snubbing a nobody. She had been performing an act of career suicide in front of the most powerful person in the entire company. Serafina finally opened the leather portfolio. Inside wasn't a deed, but a single thick sheet of letterhead paper. It was a memo addressed to the CEO of Apex Air, William Harrington. "This," Serafina said, holding it up, "is my initial directive regarding the overhaul of in-flight service protocols and training. I was on my way to Austin to deliver it in person at the corporate retreat tomorrow morning." She then looked directly at Michael Albright. "Mr. Albright, as the lead service professional on this flight, I hold you accountable for the conduct of your crew. The service I received today was not just substandard. It was actively hostile. It was poisoned by a prejudice that has no place in this company or any company." Michael swallowed hard, his face ashen. "Dr. Dubois, I am profoundly sorry. I was unaware. I should have been more observant." "Yes," Serafina agreed coolly. "You should have." Then her focus returned with laser intensity to Brittany, who was standing frozen, her crimson smile long gone, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The world had tilted on its axis, and she was in a free fall. "Ms. Jenkins," Serafina said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "You made a series of assumptions about me today. You assumed my attire reflected my worth. You assumed my race made me unworthy of your respect. You assumed your position gave you the power to dispense dignity as you saw fit. She took a step closer. Brittany flinched. You are a representative of this airline. Your uniform is supposed to be a symbol of safety, professionalism, and hospitality. Today you used it as a shield for your own bigotry. You did not just fail at your job, you have demonstrated that you are fundamentally incompatible with the values I intend to instill in this company starting today. Serafina turned to Captain Morrison. Captain, please radio ground security. Ms. Jenkins will be escorted off the premises. Her employment with Apex Air is terminated effective immediately. The words hit Brittany like a physical blow. No, she whispered, the sound catching in her throat. You can't do that. Serafina's gaze was like ice. Watch me. The moments that followed were a blur of surreal horror for Brittany. Captain Morrison, his face grim and professional, spoke quietly into his radio. Michael Albright, the purser, refused to even look at her, his expression a mixture of fear for his own job and profound disappointment. The other first-class attendant, a younger man named Kevin, just stared with wide, shocked eyes. 2 airport security officers and a stern-looking Apex ground manager in a sharp suit arrived on the jet bridge within minutes. The manager, a man named Henderson, whom Brittany had known for years, looked at her not with sympathy, but with a cold, detached professionalism that was somehow worse. Brittany, Henderson said, his voice low and firm. I need you to come with me. Please bring your personal items. Mr. Henderson, there's been a mistake, Brittany pleaded, her voice trembling. She's lying. This is insane. Dr. Serafina Dubois simply stood by the cockpit door, watching the scene unfold with the dispassionate air of a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. She didn't need to say another word. Her power was now a tangible force in the air, recognized and deferred to by everyone. There is no mistake, Henderson said, his eyes flicking nervously toward Dr. Dubois. The directive came from the highest level. Let's go. Humiliation washed over Brittany in a scalding wave. She was being treated like a criminal. She stumbled back into the galley to retrieve her purse, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grasp the handle. As she walked back through the empty first-class cabin, past the seat that had been the epicenter of her undoing, her world felt like it was dissolving around her. The familiar plush carpeting, the scent of leather and recycled air, it was all being ripped away. She was escorted down the jet bridge, past the cleaning crew, waiting to board their curious stares, feeling like physical blows. As she stepped into the terminal, the normal airport buzz of announcements and rolling suitcases sounded alien and distant. She was no longer a part of this world. She was an exile. In a small windowless office near the crew lounge, Henderson read her the official termination notice. Violation of company conduct code, gross unprofessionalism, discriminatory behavior toward a passenger. The words were clinical brutal. She was asked to surrender her company ID and wings. The small silver pin felt impossibly heavy as she unclipped it from her uniform. It had been her symbol of pride, of escape, of a life lived above the clouds. Now it was just a piece of metal. You can't do this. She repeated the words, sounding hollow, even to her own ears. I've been here for 7 years. I have a perfect record. Not anymore, Henderson said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. You are no longer permitted on Apex Air property. Security will escort you out of the terminal. The finality was absolute. As she was walked through the public areas of the airport, a place she had always strode through with an air of belonging, she felt naked without her uniform. She was just another person in a crowd stripped of her identity. News travels at the speed of light in the tight-knit world of airline crews. By the time Brittany's taxi was crawling through the Austin traffic, her phone was exploding. Text messages from colleagues, missed calls. "OMG Brit, is it true what happened on 762? Heard you got fired on the plane. What did you do? The new owner was on board and you pissed her off." The story was already morphing into legend. Each text felt like another nail in her coffin. She turned her phone off, sinking into the vinyl seat of the taxi, the city lights blurring through her tear-filled eyes. Her life had been a carefully constructed facade. Her moderately expensive apartment, her leased convertible, her weekends in Miami or Cancun, all of it was financed by a flight attendant's salary, but more importantly, it was enabled by the incredible flight benefits. Her entire social life and sense of self-worth were tied to her job. She wasn't just Brittany Jenkins. She was Brittany the globe-trotting flight attendant. Who was she now? When she got back to her apartment, the reality began to sink in with crushing weight. The key to her gilded cage now felt like the key to a prison. She couldn't afford this place without a job. She couldn't afford her car payments. She couldn't afford her life. In a fit of desperate, misdirected rage, she threw her purse against the wall. It wasn't her fault. It was that woman's fault. Dr. Serafina Dubois, who flies commercial in a cheap tracksuit when you own the airline. It was a trap. She had been set up intentionally provoked. This narrative was easier to swallow than the bitter pill of her own culpability. She was the victim here, a casualty of some power-hungry billionaire's cruel game. This ember of self-pity and blame began to glow a toxic warmth in the cold devastation of her life. She had not learned a lesson. She had found an enemy. Meanwhile, back at the airport, Dr. Serafina Dubois was met at the gate by the frantic vice president of North American operations for Apex Air, a man who had driven at breakneck speed from the corporate retreat an hour away. "Dr. Dubois, on behalf of the entire company, I am mortified. I am so sorry for what you endured." He stammered, his face beaded with sweat. Serafina's expression was unyielding. "Don't be sorry, Mr. Vance. Be better. This incident was not an anomaly. It was a symptom of a deep-seated cultural issue. An issue of complacency and prejudice that we are going to excise from this company root and stem." She held up the leather portfolio. "My plans for the service overhaul have just been revised," she said, her voice sharp. "They are now far more aggressive. The training will be immediate, mandatory, and intensive, and I will be personally overseeing it. We will be the best, not just in comfort or punctuality, but in character. The incident today will be a case study in our new training manual, Chapter 1. As she walked toward the black car waiting for her on the tarmac, leaving a trail of terrified executives in her wake, she felt no triumph. There was no joy in ruining a woman's life. But there was a grim satisfaction in knowing that a poison had been identified and the cure was about to be administered, whether the patient wanted it or not. The sky was hers now, and she would not allow it to be a home for small-minded hate. The story of Brittany Jenkins and Flight 762 became an industry cautionary tale overnight. It was whispered in galleys discussed in crew lounges from Dubai to Los Angeles. The details were embellished. Some said she'd thrown a drink on Dr. Dubois, others that she'd used a racial slur. The truth was almost worse in its banality. She had been undone by a simple roll of her eyes, an attitude, a deep-seated prejudice that had finally collided with absolute power. Robert Chen, true to his word, had filed a detailed and scathing report. He didn't know the full extent of the fallout, but his account of Brittany's deliberate and targeted disrespect was added to the official file, cementing the justification for her termination. For Brittany, the weeks that followed were a slow, agonizing descent. Her applications to other major airlines were met with polite but swift rejections. The aviation industry was smaller than it looked, and her name was now unofficially blacklisted. No one wanted to hire the flight attendant who had insulted the new owner of Apex Air on her first day. Her friends, most of whom were fellow flight attendants, began to distance themselves. Her problem was contagious. Being associated with her felt risky. The casual invitations for drinks or weekend trips dried up. Her phone, once a constant source of social connection, fell silent for days at a time. They didn't want to hear her bitter tirades against Dr. Dubois, her refusal to accept any responsibility. To them, she had broken the cardinal rule, never ever create a problem you can't fix. The financial reality hit like a freight train. She broke the lease on her apartment, paying a hefty penalty that wiped out most of her savings. She sold her convertible for a loss. Within 2 months, she had moved from a high-rise with a pool and a view to a cramped third-floor walk-up in a rundown part of town, the constant sound of traffic replacing the quiet hum of jet engines. Her life, once a curated feed of exotic locations and glamorous selfies in uniform, became a grim cycle of job hunting and mounting bills. She took a temporary job waitressing at a soulless chain restaurant near the airport, a place she used to mock with her friends. Now she served greasy burgers to apathetic travelers, her old life flying just overhead, a constant, painful reminder of everything she had lost. Every plane that took off was a fresh torment. She would watch them climb into the sky and feel a visceral ache of exclusion. That had been her world, her kingdom. Now she was grounded, trapped in a life she had always felt superior to. Her resentment toward Dr. Serafina Dubois festered, mutating into a full-blown obsession. She scoured the internet, reading every article she could find about the tech mogul. She learned about her groundbreaking work in AI, her philanthropic efforts in STEM education for underprivileged girls, her quiet, intensely private life. The media portrayed Serafina as a visionary, a trailblazer, a force for good. Brittany saw a monster, a cold, calculating woman who had destroyed her life over nothing. A hypocrite who preached about empowerment while crushing a working-class woman under her heel. She conveniently forgot her own actions, her sneering contempt, the prejudice she had displayed so freely. In the narrative she constructed in her own mind, she was David, and Serafina was a cruel, corporate Goliath. This burning sense of injustice gave her a new toxic purpose. She wasn't just going to get back on her feet. She was going to get even. She didn't know how, but the fantasy of a confrontation sustained her through the drudgery of her new life. She imagined exposing Serafina to the world, telling everyone what a tyrant she was. She pictured a tearful apology, a job offer reinstated a victory. Meanwhile, Dr. Dubois was transforming Apex Air. The Ether Initiative, as her new training program was called, was rolled out company-wide. It was a rigorous, weeks-long course focused not just on service protocols, but on empathy, cultural sensitivity, and unconscious bias. She brought in sociologists and psychologists to lead workshops. She implemented a new anonymous feedback system where crew could report prejudice from passengers or from each other without fear of reprisal. The changes were jarring for some of the old guard, but the results were undeniable. Customer satisfaction scores soared. Employee morale, after an initial period of uncertainty, began to improve dramatically. Crews felt respected and empowered. Dr. Dubois herself made a point of flying commercial on different routes at least once a month, sitting in coach business and first class observing and talking to her employees. She learned their names, listened to their concerns, and treated them as the frontline ambassadors they were. She never once spoke of the incident on Flight 762. It was as promised a case study in the training manual, but the names were anonymized. To her, Brittany Jenkins was no longer a person. She was a data point, an example of a system failure that had now been corrected. She had moved on her focus on the macro level, on building a better, more respectful corporate culture. She had no idea that the data point she had discarded was still festering, plotting, and waiting for a chance to strike back. One rainy Tuesday, while scrolling through a business journal on her phone during her break, Brittany saw an article. It was about the grand opening of the new Ether Apex corporate campus in Austin, a state-of-the-art facility that would serve as the company's innovation hub. There was a photo of Dr. Dubois cutting a ceremonial ribbon. The article mentioned the campus would feature several public-facing amenities on its ground floor, including a high-end coffee bar called The Grindstone, part of a local chain known for its ethical sourcing and skilled baristas. An idea sharp and dangerous pierced through the fog of her depression. Confronting Dr. Dubois at a press conference was a fantasy, but getting close to her back into her world, even in the most menial way, that might just be possible. She looked up the Grindstone coffee bar. They were hiring. Getting the job at the Grindstone was surprisingly easy. They needed experienced service staff, and Brittany's 7 years of first-class cabin service, stripped of its airline context, looked impressive on an application for a barista position. She spun a story about wanting a change of pace, a job that kept her feet on the ground. She was charming in the interview, deploying the practiced smile and poise that had once served her so well at 35,000 feet. She was hired on the spot. The first week was a whirlwind of training, learning the difference between a macchiato and a cortado, memorizing syrup combinations, mastering the perfect microfoam for a latte. It was humbling, monotonous work. The pay was a fraction of what she used to make, and instead of designer perfume and fine wine, she now smelled of burnt coffee and cleaning solution. But she had a goal. The Grindstone's location inside the gleaming glass and steel lobby of the new Ether Apex headquarters was the entire point. It was a Trojan horse. Every day she watched the employees of her former company walk past, pilots in crisp uniforms, executives with leather briefcases, flight attendants, younger, happier versions of who she used to be, chatting on their way to the crew briefing rooms. Each one was a stab of envy. She learned the rhythms of the building. She saw Dr. Serafina Dubois twice in the first 2 weeks, always from a distance. The woman was a whirlwind of focused energy, striding through the lobby, flanked by a small entourage, her eyes fixed forward, deep in conversation. She never stopped for coffee. Brittany began to craft a plan. It was no longer about a grand public confrontation. That was a foolish fantasy. Her new plan was more intimate, more insidious. She would wait for the perfect moment, a time when Dr. Dubois came to the counter, alone, and then she would deliver a perfectly rehearsed speech. It would not be an apology. It would be an accusation delivered with a victim's poise. She would speak of her ruined life, her lost career, the crushing weight of a single disproportionate punishment. She would make Dr. Dubois see her not as a disgruntled employee, but as a human being whose life she had casually destroyed. She hoped to elicit guilt, perhaps even a flicker of remorse. Maybe it would be enough to get Serafina to make a call to undo the damage. For a month, she waited, her bitterness simmering. She became an expert barista, her movements becoming automatic. The job was mind-numbing, but the proximity to her target was a constant, low-grade stimulant. Then, one Thursday morning, the opportunity arrived. It was early before the main morning rush. The lobby was quiet. Brittany was wiping down the counter when she saw her. Dr. Dubois was walking toward the coffee shop, and she was alone. She was dressed not in a tracksuit, but in an impeccably tailored navy blue suit. She was on her phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. This was it. Brittany's heart began to pound in her chest. Her palms grew slick with sweat. She took a deep breath, rehearsing the opening lines of her speech in her head. "Dr. Dubois, you may not remember me, but you ruined my life." Serafina ended her call just as she reached the counter. She looked up, her gaze sweeping past Brittany without a flicker of recognition, and focused on the menu board behind her. To Serafina, Brittany was just another service worker in a uniform, a face in the background of her life. The anonymity was a dagger to Brittany's pride. After all this, after months of obsession, she was invisible. "Good morning," Serafina said, her voice the same calm, melodic tone Brittany remembered with a sickening jolt. "Could I please have a large black coffee?" The simple, mundane request shattered Brittany's carefully constructed plan. All the eloquent, accusatory words vanished from her mind, replaced by a raw, overwhelming wave of pure hatred. This woman who held the power of a god over her life was ordering a coffee as if nothing had ever happened, as if Brittany were nothing. The poison inside her finally overflowed. "A black coffee!" Brittany repeated, her voice shaking with a rage she could no longer contain. "Is that all you're not going to demand? Some special, vegetarian, pre-ordered coffee that doesn't exist? You're not going to ruin my life over it if I get it wrong?" Serafina's eyes, which had been distant, snapped into sharp focus. For the first time, she truly looked at the barista in front of her. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, not of a name or a person, but of an event. Flight 762. The eye roll, the cold hostility. It all came back in an instant. "Ms. Jenkins," Serafina said, her voice dropping, all warmth gone. The use of her name, the confirmation that she was remembered, was the validation Brittany craved. It broke the dam. "Yes, it's me," she spat, leaning forward over the counter. "The flight attendant you destroyed, the one you blacklisted from every airline in the country. Are you happy? Does this make you feel powerful? Seeing me like this, wiping down your counters, serving you coffee, it was you. You set me up coming onto that plane, looking like a homeless person. It was a test, and you failed me on purpose." A few people in the lobby had turned to stare. Serafina remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable. She let Brittany's tirade echo in the cavernous space. "You think this is about you?" Serafina finally asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You think I have spent a single moment thinking about you since that day you were a problem, Ms. Jenkins? A variable in a system that needed to be removed. I removed it. And the system is now healthier. That is all. The clinical detached assessment was more devastating than any shouting match could have been. Brittany wasn't a rival. She was a bug that had been patched out of the code. My life is in ruins because of you." Brittany shrieked, tears of rage and self-pity streaming down her face. "No," Serafina corrected her, her voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. "Your life is in ruins because of your own choices. You chose to judge a passenger based on her appearance. You chose to treat a person with contempt because of the color of her skin. You chose to abuse the small amount of power you had. The consequences are your own. You built your own cage, Ms. Jenkins. I just locked the door." With that, Serafina turned to the other barista, a young man who was staring in stunned silence. "I'll get that coffee elsewhere," she said calmly. Then she turned and walked away, not looking back. She didn't need to. The scene was over. Brittany stood trembling and exposed in the harsh fluorescent light of the lobby. Her grand confrontation had been a disaster. She hadn't elicited guilt or remorse. She had only revealed the depths of her own bitterness, and cemented her own failure. Her manager rushed out from the back office, his face pale with fury. "Jenkins, my office. Now." She knew with a soul-crushing certainty that she was about to be fired. Again. The karma that had struck her at 35,000 feet had followed her down to the ground, a relentless force she had not only failed to escape, but had actively invited back in for a second, more brutal hit. The second firing was quicker and far less formal than the first. There was no corporate office, no official notice. Just a furious, red-faced manager in a cramped stockroom office gesturing wildly at the security camera footage on his monitor. "Are you insane?" he yelled, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "That is Dr. Serafina Dubois. That is the woman who owns the company, that owns this building. You think you can scream at a tenant at that tenant and keep your job?" Brittany was silent. There was nothing left to say. The venom had been spent, leaving only a hollow, aching void. She had played her last card and lost spectacularly. She was handed her final meager paycheck in a crumpled envelope and told to be off the premises in 5 minutes. As she walked out of the Ether Apex building, for the last time, stripped of yet another uniform, another identity, she felt a profound and terrifying sense of finality. She hadn't just been fired. She had been erased. Twice. The months that followed were a descent into a grey, featureless existence. The anger that had sustained her was gone, replaced by a crushing apathy. She stopped looking for service jobs. The idea of smiling at customers, of pretending to be happy, was unbearable. She found work at a commercial laundry facility, a place of steam, noise, and anonymity. Her days were spent in the sweltering heat, feeding hotel sheets and restaurant tablecloths into massive churning machines. It was grueling, mindless labor. There was no glamour, no travel, no feeling of superiority. There was only the roar of the machines and the dull ache in her back. Her world had shrunk to the 4 walls of the laundry and her tiny bleak apartment. One evening, sorting through a bin of linens from a high-end downtown hotel, she found a copy of a financial magazine left behind in a pillowcase. She smoothed out the wrinkled pages. On the cover was a face she knew all too well, Dr. Serafina Dubois. The headline read, "The Architect of the Open Sky. How Serafina Dubois is revolutionizing the airline industry with radical empathy." With a sense of morbid curiosity, Brittany began to read. The article detailed the sweeping changes at Apex Air. It spoke of the Ether Initiative, the unconscious bias training the new corporate culture built on respect and dignity. It quoted pilots and flight attendants who praised the new direction. "She gave us our pride back," one senior purser was quoted as saying. "We're not just serving drinks anymore. We're creating an environment of respect at 35,000 feet. The article mentioned Dr. Dubois' personal philosophy. It quoted her from a recent speech. "Power is not a license to dominate. It is a responsibility to dignify. Every interaction, whether with a board member or the person cleaning the floor, is an opportunity to affirm or deny someone's humanity. We must always choose to affirm." Reading those words, surrounded by the deafening noise of the laundry, something inside Brittany finally broke. It wasn't a dramatic shattering, but a quiet, painful crack in the foundation of her own victimhood. "You chose to abuse the small amount of power you had." Serafina's words from the coffee shop echoed in her mind, no longer sounding like a cruel accusation, but like an undeniable truth. She thought back to Flight 762. She had held the power in that cabin, the power to make someone feel welcome or excluded, the power to offer a blanket or withhold it, the power to serve a meal with a smile or a sneer. It was a small kingdom, but it had been hers, and she had been a tyrant. She had chosen to deny. to deny Serafina's humanity. And in doing so, she had ultimately incinerated her own. The magazine slipped from her fingers. For the first time, the tears that came were not of anger or self-pity. They were tears of genuine, soul-deep regret. There was no one to blame. Not the tracksuit, not the pre-ordered pasta, not the quiet, powerful woman who had refused to be belittled. There was only her prejudice, her pride, her choice. There would be no redemption arc for Brittany Jenkins. She would not miraculously get a third chance. Dr. Dubois would never think of her again. Her name would remain a forgotten footnote in a corporate training manual. Her karma wasn't a single dramatic lightning strike. It was a slow, grinding erosion of a life she had taken for granted. It was the perpetual roar of the laundry machines, a sound that drowned out all possibility of escape. It was the daily exhausting work of handling the linens of the wealthy, a constant, tangible reminder of a world from which she was now permanently locked out. Her punishment wasn't the loss of her job or her apartment. It was the devastating final understanding in the steam and the noise that she had been the architect of her own downfall. She had rolled her eyes at a queen, not knowing her station. But her true, unforgivable sin, she now realized, was that she would have done the same to a pauper. And that was a poverty of spirit from which there was no recovery. The story of Brittany Jenkins is a stark and powerful reminder that the choices we make, especially the small ones, can have life-altering consequences. It wasn't a single act, but an attitude, a prejudice she allowed to fester that led to her downfall. Dr. Serafina Dubois didn't seek revenge. She simply held up a mirror, and Brittany was shattered by her own reflection. This story shows that true power isn't about wealth or status, but about character. Respect is the most valuable currency we possess, and it costs nothing to give, but as we've seen it, can cost everything to withhold. What did you think of Brittany's hard karma? Was it deserved? What would you have done in Dr. Dubois' position? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. These stories are meant to make us think and reflect on our own actions. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more dramatic, real-life storytelling that you won't want to miss. Thank you for listening.